the three forces launched a united strike against the royal shelter after 2 days. Black God's shelter was in charge of attacking the main gate of the royal shelter. From afar, Hansen saw groups of creatures rushing out of the royal shelter, fighting against human evolvers. Black God took a dozen evolvers who had a fitness level above 100, trying to go inside the shelter. However, they were soon stopped by sacred blood creatures. In the other 2 directions, humans were also stopped by creatures. Fighting could be heard everywhere, while the silver-haired spirit girl was standing on top of the wall of the shelter, looking at everything coldly, not planning to move a finger. Hansen eventually witnessed a large-scale fight. Hansen could not see clearly what was going on with Lai Zinglan and Philip. However, against a dozen evolvers with a fitness level above 100, nearly 20 sacred blood creatures had rushed out of the royal shelter, blocking the attacks from Black God's shelter completely. This was obviously not everything the royal shelter had got. There were definitely more sacred blood creatures inside the shelter, fighting against enemies from the other 2 directions. This royal shelter was incredibly strong. One man could never take down a large royal shelter like this one. Hansen felt quite impressed. Without uniting the forces on the ice field, an individual could never conquer shelter like this unless he had the strength of a super creature. Giant snakes as long as 300 feet, huge beasts that looks like titans, black-winged beasts, and birds flying in the sky. The whole battlefield was a mess. The scene was 100 times more impressive than a movie. It was equally magnificent as an interstellar war. Black God was better at commanding than Hansen thought. In addition, the majority of the evolvers had been through service, so they were no strangers to fighting together. When they were besieging creatures, they collaborated well. In fact, the casualties were not huge. In addition, some were weaker evolvers would be in charge of logistics. Once someone was hurt, he would be sent out of the battlefield immediately. Not a lot of people died. This Black God is quite impressive. He is able to command such a large-scale war. Quite talented, Hansen thought to himself. However, an enemy was an enemy no matter how good he was. Although the royal spirit was strong, it started to fall. It seemed that it could not withstand the attacks from all 3 forces for a long time. However, the silver-haired spirit did not plan to attack. She was watching the entire battlefield coldly on top of the wall, moving her staff once in a while, commanding the creatures to fight. If this continues, the shelter will be conquered if the silver-haired spirit did not have other creatures to help her, Hansen thought to himself. As Hansen was thinking, he saw the silver-haired spirit living the war. However, he did not join the battlefield, but went back to the shelter. Hansen was surprised by her move. Currently, the fight had gone into a very fierce stage. The army of the creatures were at a disadvantage. If they lost her command, wouldn't they lose even sooner? When Hansen was feeling puzzled, he suddenly saw the earth started to shake on the battlefield in front of the shelter. Many stones were broken, and silver beetles started to come out like waves. Where the silver beetles passed, the bodies of both humans and creatures were eaten up completely, making one's scalp prickle. More and more gaps started to appear on the land, and numerous silver beetles came out. All of a sudden, the entire battlefield was a mess. Both humans and creatures were rushing to run for their lives. No one had any intention to continue the fight. Humans and creatures that were fighting against each other a minute ago started to escape together. It was hard to imagine that they were fighting for life and death just now. Even the huge snake and the giant beast were running as fast as they could. It seemed that they were very scared of the silver beetles. Hansen was also rather scared. However, after careful observation, he found that the individual of the silver beetles was not that strong. They were slightly stronger than primitive creatures, but weaker than mutant creatures. However, there were so many of them and their mouth were really sharp. Even sacred blood creatures had their weaknesses, so it was painful for them to have a silver beetle inside their body. However, Hansen felt his opportunity had come. The strength of the silver beetles was only their number and sharp mouths. In fact, their strength was not too impressive. However, wearing the golden armor and gargoyle glyph, Hansen could completely block out the silver beetles. In addition, he was covered all over, so there was no gap where the silver beetles could approach him. Although the silver beetles chased humans away, the creatures were also chased away. Taking advantage of the mess, he could enter the royal spirit and maybe there was a chance for him to get the spirit stone. Hansen summoned his armor and glyph, sneaking into the shelter in the mess. Just when he approached the battlefield, waves of silver beetles had come to him, drowning Hansen with their little bodies. Hansen felt the crackling outside his armor as the silver beetle was trying to bite his armor. However, because of the double berserk sacred blood beast souls, even their sharp mouths could not hurt the armor at all. Hansen felt reassured and marched toward the royal spirit in the Sea of Beetles. Under the cover of the Silver Beetles, no one was able to notice him. Outside the royal spirit, Hansen jumped over the wall and entered the royal spirit that looked like a cosmopolitan. The majority of the creatures had been scared away by the Silver Beetles. There were obviously less creatures in the royal shelter, but their number was still astonishing. There were no Silver Beetles inside the shelter, but a lot of creatures rushed to Hansen. Hansen did not linger but spread his nightmare wings, dodging the majority of the creatures, and went toward the spirit girl. The weird birds and black-winged beasts in the sky came toward Hansen. Hansen flapped his wings and dodged the block of the beasts and birds like a butterfly, thanks to the speed of the berserk sacred blood wings. He quickly reached where the spirit girl was standing. The spirit girl had already come to a large ancient architecture. Feeling the turmoil in the sky, she looked back standing on the stairs. Seeing Hansen, who was in the sky, her silver pupils contracted. Even he was covered in armor. The silver-haired girl still recognized Hansen, who had once killed her. She was not depending on her eyesight, but her scent that she left on Hansen's body when he killed her. Her face turned cold. The silver-haired girl waved her staff and the birds and beasts rushed to Hansen. A dual-headed silver bird and a black bull with wings also rushed to him. Hansen did not mind ordinary birds and beasts because they were much slower and weaker than Hansen. Hansen could kill them as he wanted. However, the silver bird and flying bull were obviously both sacred blood creatures. They blocked Hansen's way among other creatures. After doing that, the silver-haired spirit girl did not mind Hansen anymore and continued to go inside the mysterious architecture. After the spirit girl went inside the architecture, two identical black snakes were climbing on the columns at the gate, flicking out their tongues. Hansen had seen one of the black snake before. As time when the spirits were attacking the Starwheel shelter, she brought that black snake, which was also a sacred blood creature. How come there are so many sacred blood creatures in this royal shelter? Hansen frowned. Not all the royal shelters had a large number of sacred blood creatures. The number of sacred blood creatures in a royal shelter depended on the size of the shelter, the number of sacred blood creatures nearby, and the spirit's ability. In terms of both size and number of sacred blood creatures, this royal shelter was exceptional, which showed how strong the silver-haired girl was. To go back or forward was an impending decision that Hansen must make. There were so many creatures here that Hansen could not be trapped. Once he was trapped, he could never escape again. In just 1 second, Hansen had decided. He had already entered the shelter, so it was the perfect opportunity, and he had no reason to go out. If the three forces could not take down this royal shelter when they united, since most sacred blood creatures were not even inside the shelter at this point, he would never have an opportunity to try again if he missed this opportunity. With his eyes cold, Hansen was calculating all the moves and trajectories of the creatures he was seeing. In his mind there was a holographic image and a route that would take him inside the ancient architecture. Boom! Flapping his wings, Hansen made a dive, avoiding the silver bird and flying bull. However, because he went slower, many creatures on the floor started to jump at him, throwing themselves at Hansen, who was flying low. Remaining calm, Hansen landed on an architecture. When he flew, he avoided the snaps of the creatures on the land and flew up again. In the sky, the dual-headed silver bird and other creatures rushed over again. Hansen landed again, changing his position continuously and dodging the attacks from different creatures, going toward the ancient and mysterious architecture like crazy. There was no way to block him. Hansen moved quickly among the architectures, flying up from time to time. He perfectly used the space between the architectures and the creatures themselves, going to the ancient architecture at last. The creatures were always a bit too late, not formulating any threat to Hansen. That included the two sacred blood creatures, because they never stopped Hansen. However, because he was using the terrain and the creatures, Hansen did not go straight but made a huge circle in order to arrive at the ancient architecture. The two black snakes had come down from the giant columns, blocking the closed stone gate. They opened their mouths and issued screams at Hansen, bearing their frightening fans, looking rather scary. Hansen did not pause and went up the stairs, rushing at the two black snakes. Behind him were all kinds of fierce creatures, looking like ghosts from hell. They followed Hansen and tried to take him down. The mouth of the two black snakes looked like the dark gates toward hell. Their fangs were each longer than 3 feet, dripping disgusting venom, blocking Hansen's way. Hansen no longer saw a way out. There were only the two snakes. However, he did not mean to stop at all, but speeded up. With her heart thumping like a drum and blood boiling, every inch of his muscles was motivated. Stepping out, Hansen almost immediately rushed inside the mouth of one of the black snakes. Crack! The black snake quickly closed its mouth, trying to swallow Hansen like that. However, blood suddenly spilled, and its snakeskin was ripped from inside. Blood and the golden figure both came out. The 3 purple lightning bolts shone. Boom! Hansen rushed out of the stomach of the snake and hit the giant stone gate of the ancient building, smashing one of the doors and going inside without hesitation. The inside of the ancient architecture looked like a temple, full of mysterious symbols and statues of deities. Inside the temple, a statue of ghost more than 100 feet tall stood like a demon. Between the brows of the ghost there was a silver gem about the size of a fist, which should be the spirit stone of the silver-haired girl. Under the statue, the silver-haired girl had changed into her fighting state. Her perfect body covered in silver armor, she looked lean and delicate with a perfect curve. Holding the silver slim sword, the girl had cold light in her eyes, staring at Hansen. Hansen quickly rushed toward the girl. Initially, he thought the sacred blood creatures would chase him inside, but they were all guarding outside the architecture, and none entered the gate. Hansen was overjoyed. Just coping with the silver-haired spirit girl was much easier for him. In addition, he had killed her once. Even if he could not kill her this time, it would be easy for him to get the spirit stone. Seeing Hansen was approaching the statue, the silver-haired girl exclaimed coldly and slashed her silver sword at Hansen's throat. Hansen was astonished. Last time, he deliberately took the strike that went through his body, so it did not matter how fast her sword was, since Hansen did not want to dodge at all. However, as she cut his throat this time, he would be beheaded if he did not dodge, which could never happen. Fighting the silver-haired girl face to face, Hansen felt how fast her sword was. Stepping back, Hansen raised the ghost-pawed claws to block her strike and managed to save himself. Ding! The silver sword and the ghost-pawed claws clashed, making noise of metal. Feeling a huge force, Hansen could not help stepping back. Her strength was even a bit stronger than his. After the strike, the silver-haired girl did not stop her attacks. Like silver lightning bolts, she continued to hit Hansen with her sword, forcing him to defend himself with no chance to fight back. After taking a dozen strikes, Hansen felt the sword was so fast and unpredictable that he could only go back and could not even leave. Same as her sword, the girl had incredibly fast footwork as well. She followed Hansen like a shadow, not giving him any chance to breathe. Ding ding ding. Although Hansen had blocked all the strikes from the girl, his berserk ghost-pawed claws were chipped by the slim sword of hers. Hansen's arm was also numb. Until this moment had Hansen realized how lucky he was to kill the silver-haired girl last time. If he did not surprise her by taking this sword with his body and take advantage of her carelessness, he would never have had any chance. After all, Hansen had much worse fitness at that time. He was at a disadvantage facing the silver-haired girl this time still, which meant he would have suffered even more last time if it were not for his scheme. It seemed that the silver-haired girl hated Hansen to his guts. She did not conserve any energy, forcing Hansen to step back with her sword. Changing his footwork and using kiting skills, Hansen was not the match of the silver-haired girl because he did not know any advanced claws skills. He was merely using the claws at a knife with Bladestorm. If it were not for the good footwork that Hansen had, he would have been killed by her a long time ago. Even with his footwork, Hansen was still hit so hard that he could not fight back. The sword skills of the silver-haired girl were excellent. She almost became one with her sword, crossing the sky like a lightning bolt. She was so fast that her figure became a blur. As the sword was about to reach Hansen's face, Hansen did not have his claws in place in time, so he could no longer block his strike. That's it. Hansen gritted his teeth and summoned Mad Shield, putting him in front of Hansen to bear the strike from the silver-haired girl. Hansen quickly rushed to the giant statue and went for the spirit stone, no longer lingering. Ding! Hansen heard steel being ripped apart. The tower shield of Mad Shield was cut deeply by the silver-haired girl, almost breaking in half. Hansen wanted to take back Mad Shield, but the sword of the girl was too fast indeed. Before he took Mad Shield back, another flash flew across. Crack! This time, the tower shield was cut in half for real. The slim sword cut to the tall figure of Mad Shield like a lightning bolt. With a flash, there was a line added to the body of Mad Shield. Boom! The body of Mad Shield fell into two halves. The spirit was killed like that. Not having any time to regret the loss of the aristocrat spirit that he had gained not long ago, Hansen ran toward the statue at full speed. Treading cloud, Hansen had eventually put the footwork into use. Running like wind, Hansen rushed to the statue like a tornado. However, the silver-haired girl was not slower than him at all, but even faster. Catching up with him momentarily, she stepped her sword at Hansen's back. Without turning back, a golden worm covered in red armor appeared behind Hansen, blocking the girl's sword, while Hansen jumped up and spread the nightmare wings, throwing himself at the sparkling spirit stone between the statue's brows. Ding ding ding. The 3 strikes cut the golden rock worm king consecutively, and the red armor was cut deeply. Even the shell of the worm king was broken. Golden blood started to flow. Luckily, the pet armor that had become a berserk super beast soul was much harder than the tower shield, so the golden rock worm king was not killed after taking 3 strikes. Hansen took back the golden rock worm king. The spirit stone was right in front of him. Even if the silver-haired girl came at this moment, there was no time for her to stop him from taking the stone. However, when Hansen's fingers were about to touch the spirit stone, he suddenly felt a strong anxiety. His back was covered in cold sweat. Something's wrong. As Hansen felt that, he saw a golden figure coming from behind the giant head of the statue. At the same time, a gold sword went to Hansen's chest. That sword was so fast and Hansen was so close that there was no time for him to dodge. Whoosh! The golden sword pierced the golden armor into his chest. Hansen then saw the person who stabbed him. It was a girl with wavy blonde hair and golden eyes covered in golden armor, holding a golden slim sword. Except for the fact that everything was golden on her body, the girl looked almost identical to the silver-haired girl. They were almost like 2 dolls made from the same mold, only with different colors of their armor and hair. Boom! The blonde girl kicked Hansen down to the floor. Hansen fell hard and saw that on the back of the statue there was another face. The statue was 2-faced, and between the eyebrows of the face and the back, there was another spirit stone, which was golden and shiny. Twin spirits. Hansen eventually understood why the silver-haired girl would be so relaxed to fight Hansen alone, not asking the creatures to hit him, because that was unnecessary. The spirit shelter was in fact a rare double spirit shelter. In addition to the silver-haired girl, there was a similarly good blonde girl. Hansen could not even get rid of the silver-haired girl, let alone 2 girls. Without any hesitation, the moment when Hansen fell to the ground, he got up and brushed toward the outside. Motivating his body and cracking his bones, Hansen pushed his potentials to his limit. The silver-haired girl and blonde girl did not mean to let him go. The 2 beautiful but deadly figures rushed toward Hansen like to lightning bolts. Blood spilled like rain. Hansen had used the kiting skills to his limit. However, all he could do was to avoid his vital parts. The silver and golden slim sword continued to leave one injury after another on his body. The sword skills of the blonde girl and silver-haired girl were compatible. They complement each other and were much stronger when used alone. Hansen did not even want to fight anymore. He had miscalculated from the very beginning, so he did not have a chance to win again. All he could do was to go out as fast as he could in order to survive. With blood covering his body, Hansen was extremely lucid. His eyes cold, he quickly calculated every possibly as fast as he could. Hansen only had one goal. Under the attack of both royal spirits, he did not any chance to get the spirit stone again. Every step he made was traded with his injury. Every step was carefully designed, but it could not save him from being hurt. At this point, Hansen had no other ways than trading injuries for his life. When he reached at the stone gate, he was covered in a lot of blood already. At this point, Hansen could only celebrate the fact that he had both the armor and the glyph. Otherwise, even if he had practiced Jadeskin, he would have died 1,000,000 times. The effect of the armor and glyph blocked the majority of the force on the swords of the girls. When the swords hit him, the remaining force was less than 30%, only leaving shallow marks on him. The flying bull fiercely threw itself at Hansen, charging Hansen with its horns. However, the next second, a huge golden creature fell from the sky, smashing all the creatures nearby. Rush out! Hansen threw himself onto the back of the golden growler, which was the size of a hill, and roared, grabbing his hair. The golden growler routed and ran into the group of creatures like crazy, getting rid of the creatures and marching toward the main gate. As a super mount, the golden growler was no weaker than a sacred blood mount of Second God's Sanctuary after becoming berserk. In addition, its giant body was extremely fast. Every step it made was more than 300 feet. Even with the speed of the silver-haired girl, she could not catch up with it. In addition, most creatures were like ants in front of the golden growler, unable to block its way. Even so, numerous creatures still threw themselves at the mount, biting at it and making it bleed. As the golden blood was spilled, the golden growler rolled in pain. As Hansen killed the creatures that threw themselves at him, birds and flying beasts were charging him from the sky. With blood and dead bodies of creatures everywhere, it was incredibly violent. Boom! Hansen was hit hard on his head. It was the beak of the two-headed silver bird. Although Hansen's helmet was not broken, it was so painful that Hansen screamed and almost fell from the golden growler. The golden growler had God knows how many creatures on its body. Bleeding everywhere, golden growler was still the king of first God's sanctuary. With a roar, it fiercely jumped up into the sky like a hill. When it fell, several palaces were smashed and there was almost an earthquake in the future royal shelter. A lot of creatures were killed and the majority of the creatures on its body were shaken down. Hansen grabbed the golden hair of the mount and managed to stay on top. The golden growler got up and ran toward the main gate again. Groups of creatures came up to it. Fight, fight, fight. It was the first time for Hansen to be trapped in such a hard battle. He had no idea how many creatures he had killed. His hand became numb, but more creatures kept coming at him. A mile from the main gate, the golden growler roared and fell to the ground, smashing the earth. It was covered in golden blood and its skin was broken everywhere by numerous creatures. One of its paws no longer looked intact, bearing bones. It was incredible that the mount had lasted so long. Hansen took back the golden growler and spread his wings, flying outside the shelter. However, all the bird creatures and flying beasts were coming at him already, especially the flying bull, diving at him with its horns like spears. Without the protection of the golden growler, Hansen knew that he could not be stopped again. Seeing the two-headed silver bird chasing him from the back, Hansen gritted his teeth and charged the flying bull. A black lightning bolt and a golden lightning bolt clashed. When Hansen's head was about to hit the horns, he suddenly contracted his wings and flipped in the sky, putting his legs forward, clipping the neck of the bull, and bowed to hit the bull's stomach hard. Boom! The ghost pod claws stepped into the stomach of the black bull with fierce force. Hansen pulled hard and blood was spilled. A scream sounded, and the magnificent body of the bull fell to the ground. Hansen stepped on the back of the black bull and summoned his wings, rushing out of the shelter. Boom! Hearing a loud object fall, Hansen then heard the voice. Sacred blood creature Inferno Bull killed. Beast soul of Inferno Bull gained. Eat its meat to gain 0 to 10 sacred geno points. However, Hansen had no time to mind those. Like a butterfly covered in blood, he broke the blockage of the flying creatures and came out of the royal shelter. Seeing Hansen going out of the shelter, the silver-haired girl looked mad. However, there was nothing she could do. Under these circumstances, the men still managed to leave the shelter, so there were no other methods that she could adopt. Back to the Crystal Palace, Hansen treated his wounds as he thought about the twin spirits that he ran into. Hansen did not regret at all. All he could think about at this point was how to take the twin spirits for himself. He wanted them so much. Rare twin spirits, both royal. They were so scarce. Coupled with their strength and beauty, it was a gift from heaven. I must have them, Hansen thought, feeling resentful. However, the twin spirits were so powerful and had so many sacred blood creatures. When Hansen entered the shelter, only several sacred blood creatures were guarding the shelter. If it were any other time, there should be at least 3 to 4 dozen sacred blood creatures inside. So, it was very unlikely for him to go inside again. However, that did not make Hansen give up his greedy thought. He was determined to have the twin spirits, so no matter how hard it was, he will have them. In order to have them, I must first have the ability to beat them and get the 2 spirit stones. The sacred blood creatures were not that frightening. After all, they were not intelligent. There is always a way to cope with them. However, the spirit sisters are very clever and powerful. If I am not able to beat them, I can never have the spirit stones. Hansen thought back on their sword skills. Hansen had taken countless strikes from the sisters. He had at least 100 to 200 injuries on his body. With his experience to fight the silver-haired girl, Hansen had learned their sword skills. Give me some time, and I will come up with a solution for sure. Hansen was certain that he had this ability. Sacred Blood Inferno Bull, Shapeshifting Beast Soul. Hansen looked at his new beast soul with a touch of hesitation. He did not expect it to be a Sacred Blood Shapeshifting Beast Soul. Too bad it was not a humanoid beast soul. Once it transformed, it could only be able to battle with its Inferno Bull's appearance. Hansen was not really interested in this type of shapeshifting beast soul, but an Inferno Bull had the ability to fly. A beast soul like this would sell for a high price, and if he used black crystals to evolve it into a berserk beast soul, its selling price would be even higher. If there's a humanoid shapeshifting beast soul, the chances of beating the twin spirit in battle will be much higher, Hansen thought to himself. Although the Fairy Queen's ability in the second God's Sanctuary was close to that of the beast soul, she was prone to a particular weakness. When she was shapeshifted, she could no longer wear armor. If that happened, Hansen's defenses would be too low. He had no hope of withstanding attacks from the creatures from the second God's Sanctuary. This entire situation had yet to yield a solution. While he healed the wounds he had incurred, he also tried to think how he might crack the twin spirit sword skills. Hansen decided to learn a hyper-geno art to withstand their sword skills. Because of this, he went to the St. Hall community in the military base to find the hyper-geno art he desired. The twin spirit sword skills relied entirely on speed, so there were many ways to overcome their flurry of attacks. One could use speed to beat their own speed, but another could enable a high defense to withstand each hit. Hansen had seen many evolvers' hyper-geno arts, but none had satisfied him. The military's St. Hall community, compared to the St. Hall community ordinary people could visit, offered a far wider variety of hyper-geno art. After Hansen read the introduction, he found a species of the hyper-geno art that made him feel optimistic. This was a joint strike sword skill called duel, one that required 2 people. That meant that 2 people were needed to practice the sword skill. Hansen thought about this for a moment. If each person was able to use one sword, it would be incredibly difficult for them to block the twin spirits' dual blades. With their speed, it would not matter how fast Hansen's sword was, it would be extremely difficult for him to be faster than the twin spirit. If he wanted to beat them, Hansen would require 2 swords. Therefore, Hansen selected duel for its double strike sword skill. If this was anyone else, it would be impossible for them to use both hands to cast such a sword skill. But Hansen possessed the necessary talent of both hands. His hands weren't classed separately, as they were both considered primary, and the fortitude of his mind allowed for perfect individual control. He could use a different sword skill in each hand. He only needed to slightly modify the operation of the dual skill. Hansen noticed that the skills that required 2 people were completely different to one person wielding 2 blades. To complete this sword skill, it was nearly impossible for one person to do it solo. After all, if there were 2 people, they could strike from different positions. Being alone and using both hands, your position and angle was limited. So a lot of the moves in the dual blade sword skill were impossible to perform with 2 hands. But Hansen was not a person who gave up easily, and he could not think of any other ways he could defeat the twin spirit in battle. He was still set on making big changes to the dual sword skill. Today Hansen had visited the shelter again. Li Xinglun was there and found him, wearing a strange facial expression. Hansen, I found a humanoid sacred blood-fused transfigured beast soul. Li Xinglun's tone of voice was also somewhat strange. It is a sacred blood-class Snow Lady Beast soul. The abilities of the Snow Lady Beast soul are quite special. It does not increase one's strength, just one's speed. It also has the ability to reduce one's temperature, but that seems rather useless to me. It would most likely just become a problem. I don't think it's worth trading a Berserk Beast soul for a Snow Lady Beast soul. Plus, you had argued with Black God before, Li Xinglun said severely. Did you say that it was me who wanted to trade? Hansen asked. No, I only said that it was a friend. Li Xinglun shook his head as he spoke. Hansen thought for a moment about what to say, then said, that's okay. Feel free to tell him it's me who wants to trade. If he is willing, tell him to come here so we can complete the transaction. It was time to trade with Black God. Black God had brought people with him to the Starwheel shelter. He noticed that Hansen's eyes were a little cold, but of this he made no mention. Hansen, you dare gamble with me. Perhaps now we can settle our grudge. What do you want? Hansen furrowed his eyebrows in response. You and I engage in battle. Regardless of who wins or loses, our grudge can be settled. Black God looked at Hansen and continued, of course, if you do lose, you must leave behind the Snow Lady Beast soul. If I lose, however, I can leave behind the Inferno Bull Beast soul. Li Xinglun frowned and said, Black God, we only want to exchange beast souls on this day. Nothing else. I am merely suggesting a solution to our grudge. It is entirely up to him if he wants to partake in my idea. If he does not dare to engage me in battle, that is fine, Black God said sternly. What if I do not wish to gamble? Hansen looked at Black God as he asked, if you do not wish to settle our prolonged dispute, then you will become my enemy, and I do not go soft on those I deem to be my enemy. The few people who had accompanied Black God now summoned their beast souls. Black God, this is the Starwheel shelter. This is not Black God's shelter. Li Xinglun's eyes went cold, and he summoned a few leaders from the Starwheel shelter to push back against Black God's people. Li Xinglun, do you really want to offend me on the behalf of a person who doesn't even matter? Black God looked at Li Xinglun sternly. Hansen saved me when the Starwheel shelter was in crisis. He is my savior, no one can do him any harm before me. Li Xinglun said these words directly. Black God's emotion began to change, the atmosphere inside the shelter growing tense. It was like a room that was packed to the brim with explosives, where the presence of a single spark would be enough to ignite the volatile atmosphere. It is okay to have a one-on-one, but the beast souls that we gamble must be held onto by Li Xinglun. Hansen said all of a sudden. That is no problem. Black God agreed to the terms, as he knew all about Li Xinglun's identity. He knew he was not the sort to accept the beast's souls and make a run for it. There was also the fact that Black God's purpose there was not merely to win a beast's soul, he wanted Hansen's life. Hansen had stolen the Snakefish King in the past and used a poison dagger to hurt him. This had almost taken Black God's life, and was the cause of the anger that he could never find it in himself to swallow. When they arrived at the plaza, Hansen and Black God handed their beast souls over to Li Xinglun. Please, Black God said, as he went onto the stage of the plaza, staring at Hansen as he went. Ever since he had taken control of Black God's shelter, he had never been put at such a disadvantage. If he had the opportunity, he would relish killing Hansen immediately. This time, he did not want only the return of his beast's soul, he wanted his life back too. Black God was highly confident in his tornado knife skill. He had battled with Hansen once before, so he thought he knew the extent of his abilities. That is why the idea of combating on stage intimidated Hansen. Word of the bet between Black God and Hansen spread quickly, and drew quite the crowd to the Starwheel shelter to observe it firsthand. Li Xinglun began to feel hopeless. If Hansen did not agree to the bet, he could still protect Hansen and keep him safe inside the Starwheel shelter. But if Black God managed to kill Hansen, then there was nothing he could do but to adhere to the terms of the wager and provide the beast's souls all to Black God. Once Hansen was on stage, Black God no longer felt no desire to exchange words with him. He wanted to bite into Hansen's flesh with a savage ferocity. He summoned the Black Beast's soul knife and started swiping at Hansen with fierce desire. Black God took a step back and dodged the ghost pod claws. He took up his stance with the knife again and attempted to attack, but he had only raised his weapon halfway when he realized he couldn't do what he had planned. As before, if he opened himself up with a wide attack, his waist would be exposed to the fury of the ghost pod claws. Coincidence? Black God was stricken with worry, unable to believe what was happening. Nor could he believe that someone could so effectively block his tornado knife skill. Black God took a step back and attacked again, his face distorted into an ugly grimace. The people watching were already shocked. Those outside as well inside the arena could see quite clearly everything that was happening. The famous knife skill of Black God was utterly useless against Hansen. Tornado knife skill seemed to have all of a sudden become a total joke. Black God could not even draw his knife out, so there was no way he could attempt to attack twice as fast. Black God had never appeared so lame, so feeble as at this very moment. Hopeless, he felt hopeless. Black God was suddenly overwhelmed with the fear that he was going to die, and that his bladder would give way if he couldn't reach a bathroom in time. Even the few observers from Black God's shelter were shocked at what they were seeing. They were close to being unable to believe their eyes. They clearly knew the strength and extent of Black God's power, and the ferocity of his tornado knife skill ought to have made him unbeatable in the ice fields. How could it be suppressed in the way they were seeing? Where did this guy come from? Their faces were bursting with surprise. If Black God was already close to submission, they would end up in a far worse condition if they were to go on stage. 2 or 3 hits would probably be enough to end their lives. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss the next chapter.